Just a couple of little quick things for the folks who are listening and watching today. We have the chat open. You're not going to be able to talk. We've got the mute on for everyone, but I want you to be able to put things into the chat. So type away if you have questions as we go on. There will be a question and answer period at the end. So I will be taking all of the stuff that's in the chat and turning that into questions for Ms. Mandel at the end of all of this excitement. So please put things into the chat. And for the teachers, if you are in a classroom, if you would put into the chat how many people are in your room right now so that I can make an accurate count of how many bodies we have, that would be much appreciated. All right, so Rebecca Meacham, if you would please take over from me, I will put my mute on.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see all of these different groups here on the screen. Welcome to the event today. We are so lucky to have Emily St. John Mandel here with us. I'm going to introduce her, not that you don't know who she is, but I'm going to introduce her, and then we'll get started with some conversation about all sorts of things. So, and then I'm really excited. I think we're all excited. If you have some questions to put in the chat, we'd love to see them. So here I go. As a teenager, Emily St. John Mandel lived with her family on an island. Like many of you from all around Door County, she grew up surrounded by water, cedar forests, and maybe like 1,000 other people in her town. You might recognize a little bit of this island from the novel Station 11 because Arthur, too, grows up on an island where there's a mysterious severed Barbie doll stuck in the ground by a lake that fills a crater. You might recognize the kinds of weird legends that grow wild in a small town surrounded by trees and water. And you might realize, hey, maybe I have some stories to tell. And you should. Because just think what might happen if you do go on to tell those stories. For Emily St. John Mandel, she went on to write 5 novels, including Station 11, which has been translated into 31 languages, has won all kinds of awards, has ended up on all sorts of bestseller lists and best of lists, has sold millions of books, which allowed her to put her brother through college, and she's just about to see this novel become a series on HBO Max. So let's hear it let's hear from the author about how she began her career, how she wrote Station 11, and what kind of world might await us after our own pandemic. Welcome, Emily St. John Mandel.
Thank you so much. I wish I were somewhere in person, but I'm glad we can at least do this.
Yeah, this is great. And it's so much safer, and we're keeping you safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I started talking about your life on an island. Was your own childhood like Arthur's from Station 11?
Yeah, very much so. And, I'd be curious to hear if this resonates with any of you on Washington Island or any other small, beautiful, rural places. But, although there's nothing explicitly autobiographical in Station 11, the experience that Arthur has, the way he relates to the island where he grew up, is really my experience. His line in the book is, "It was gorgeous and claustrophobic. I loved it, and I always wanted to escape." And that's how I felt. By the time I was 14 or 15, there was this feeling like, get me out of here to the biggest possible city, please. So I worked toward that goal, and I actually ended up studying contemporary dance of all things. So I went to Toronto when I was 18 to dance in this conservatory program for modern and contemporary dance, and that's what got me off the island. And I've been in big cities ever since.
So just a question on that. So
Mhm.
when you were on the island and you thought about big cities and like get me out of here, like what was your concept of a big city? How did you think about like this is what's going to happen when I go there?
Right.
Teenage point of view.
You know, um, there's something about living in a small community. It doesn't have to be an island where, to be blunt about it, everybody knows your business. Everybody knows everything about everybody else.
Mhm.
And I'm not suggesting that that's automatically a negative. There are people who find a real sense of community and kind of closeness and tightness in that. And I just found it a little bit claustrophobic, to be absolutely honest. So I think my conception of a city was an interesting place with people who I haven't been seen, who I don't know, which would be really nice and refreshing. After living in such a small place, there were 1,000 people on the island where I grew up. So I think I saw it as being an experience of anonymity, which to me felt like privacy and like something I wanted when I was a teenager.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds that's what I would have romanticized that. So
Yeah.
that seems like it would be really cool. Or the opportunity to be discovered. Like, I don't know how many of you on screen felt this, but when my children who are 12 and 14 and me as a 12 and 14 and 15-year-old, I always wanted to be famous, but I didn't want to do the work involved with that at all. So if I were in a city, someone would be like, "You should be famous." I don't know if you
Right.
felt that way with because you were doing dance, and that would be something that would be on stage and performative and
Yeah, it's true. Although, neither of the two careers I've had, in dance and then in writing, neither of them leads to like real fame. Like, I don't need to worry about paparazzi as a novelist.
you're not
And
Arthur.
yeah, contemporary dance, same thing. Yeah, they're just art forms that I love so much. And yeah, so I don't know if I was thinking about being famous so much as I was thinking about just an opportunity to do something I really loved. Because you'll be shocked to hear there were no contemporary dance companies on the island with 1,000 people. So I know, right? And I didn't really want to start my own. So I
Yeah,
wanted to go somewhere with a kind of established artistic world that I could plug into more easily.
oh, that would be, and to be around other artists, and that would
Yeah,
be, yeah.
absolutely.
So, okay, so if dance is your way out, then I'm curious about writing over here as you're a young person on the island. So, were you a big reader? Did you have a favorite book that you want to talk about a little bit here? Like, what was your, how did the writing part begin for you? So were you a big reader? Did you have a
I
favorite book?
was. Yeah, I was a really big reader. I was homeschooled when I was a kid, and not for any ideological reason, really. And I say that because I grew up in Canada. I've noticed that when I tell Americans that I was homeschooled, that can sometimes read as code for a really intense fundamentalist religiosity. Parents who don't want their kids exposed to science, like that kind of thing. So it wasn't that. It was just that my parents were hippies, and that was just kind of the back to the land thing to do in British Columbia, when I was a kid. So they kept me home from school as an experiment for kindergarten. And then I just kind of never went until I was 15. And, if we're being honest here, the curriculum was a little haphazard. Like, I wouldn't say that I got a phenomenal, well balanced education, but I did have a lot of time to read. And my parents are both people who love books. So we had a house full of books. We had a library. I had a library card, so I go to the library every single week. And yeah, reading was it was like a portal.
Mm,
That as beautiful as the place was where I grew up, that is kind of a constrained world. There wasn't that much going on there. So yeah, getting to spend time in the world of books meant so much to me. I remember reading a ton of sci-fi when I was a teenager, just in the spirit of, I want to see new worlds. I think that was what it was about. So, yeah, I just read really voraciously. There was a period of time when I was 8 or 9 years old when one of the very few requirements of the curriculum was that I had to write something every day.
mm,
So I was in the habit of writing from a really early age. And what happened was I was training pretty intensively in dance. We were a 10-minute ferry ride and then a 45-minute drive from a really excellent ballet school. So I trained in ballet. I went to Toronto when I was 18 to study contemporary dance. I graduated from a really good program and was shocked to realize when I was about 21 that I just didn't love it anymore,
mm,
which was totally unexpected. That, sometimes the thing you wanted to do from the time you were 6 years old, like sometimes that can feel like a bit of a chore somehow. And there was just kind of no more joy in it.
mm,
So then that kind of raised the obvious question, well, now what? I had a mountain of student loan debt from the dance school. So it never occurred to me to go back to school. I just kind of felt like that was off the table. Um, and, I had always written just for my own pleasure. It was just a hobby when I was a teenager and young adult. And I just found myself thinking, well, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could try writing a novel and just see if I can do it and see if it works. So when I was about 22, I started writing what eventually became my first novel, Last Night in Montreal.
So at 22.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it took a long time to write and it took forever to sell. It didn't come out till I was 30, but yeah, I started writing it really young. And it's funny. I actually went back and read it last week because I'm thinking about trying to adapt it into a movie. So I read it last week and it was like, I didn't hate it, but it was like a time capsule, this feeling of, wow, I would never tell the story like that now. Your sensibility changes so much over decades. But
You
yeah,
remind
I was young when I started writing it.
you reminding me a little bit of, and maybe the people here can relate to this. My own 12 and 14-year-old children are looking back at their elementary school yearbooks. And so, I mean, they haven't been around that long. And so that's weird to them. And they are just looking at, how dorky they were or whatever. And I imagine looking at your early writing is kind of like a little cringe like that. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
it-
Yeah. And like just seeing, yeah, going back and reading that prose and be like, wow, I worked really hard to make that sentence really pretty. Like, it's just like, you can just like see the effort in there.
there's like sweat on the page. Like,
Exactly. Pretty much. Yeah. It
it's
drips
not
out of the
toys.
book.
It's really great. Oh my goodness, that's so funny. So this raises a question that I actually have. There may be aspiring writers here on the screen, but I'm actually kind of curious. So like, what was your first success? Like, when did you know that was a good idea? Did you have something small in print first? Did someone say, "Oh yeah, you're good at this. You should write a novel"? Like, how did you don't just sort of come up with that and then you're the author here on our screen from the NEA big read. So,
Right.
like, what was the first sort of stuff?
I don't feel like I took a really typical route. If there is a typical route, I'm going to walk that back a little bit because I'm not
Mhm.
sure there is. But I do have a lot of friends who started off as short stories and then moved on to novels. I just kind of went straight for the novel. I knew I was reasonably good at writing. I'd gotten praise for things I'd written over the years. I wanted to try writing a novel. So I did. It took 4 years, mostly because I wasn't taking myself seriously as a writer. I would drop it for 2 months. And through this whole period, I had various retail jobs. So, I was busy. So yeah, it took 4 years to write. I and then finally, after 4 years, I had what I thought was a pretty good first draft, which felt hilarious in retrospect because it changed so much before publication. But yeah, so I had a first draft of a novel. And by that point, I'd moved down from Canada. I was living in Brooklyn. And so I started trying to find an agent. And I'm going to pause the story for a second to say how you should find an agent if you are an aspiring writer, because it's different than what I did. If you're a writer, if you finish your book, the thing to do is to find books that are similar in some way, same genre, same theme. Find out who the agent was. It's usually in the acknowledgments or the author's website. And then you're in a great position to query that agent and say, I understand that you're the agent for author X. My book is similar to hers in the following ways. I wonder if you might be interested in taking a look. And that shows the agent that you're a serious person who's done their research. But to back up a little bit to the way I did it is I found a list of New York City literary agents who represented literary fiction. And I just worked my way down the list. And I was sending out a cover letter and 3 sample chapters. And usually they'd reject it within 48 hours. It was amazing. It was just like the fastest rejection turnaround. The 13th or 14th agent who I queried was this woman, Emily Jacobson at Curtis Brown. And actually, she didn't reject it. First, she requested a full manuscript, which I sent, and then she rejected it. But her editorial letter was so generous. It was really a list of the things that were wrong with the novel. I didn't quite understand why this character did that, or I was a little bit confused by the timeline through here. And it was the first really substantial feedback I'd gotten on the novel. And so I remember reading the letter and thinking, well, there's no guarantee of future representation if I take her advice. But worst case scenario, I'll have a better novel. So I spent 6 months revising and then sent it to her again. And then she took me on as a client. And it was just the most thrilling moment. I remember feeling like if I never have any more success in my entire life, like I'll always have this. I got a New York City literary agent. It just felt amazing. She was in her mid 80s when she took me on as a client, which I'm mentioning only because she had a very literally old school way of doing things, which is she sent the manuscript out to one publisher at a time. So it took a couple of years to get rejected by every publisher in New York City, and probably a few outside the city too. I want to say Last Night in Montreal was rejected about 35 times. And then finally it landed with a really small press called Unbridled Books. They were so small, they didn't have a headquarters. They were based virtually in Missouri and Colorado. And, I hadn't heard of them. It was a really small press. It was a very small advance. I certainly couldn't quit my job or anything like that. But it felt so great to have that, to get published. They were wonderful to work with. So I stayed with them for 3 books. And, the way it worked financially was I made just enough money on those advances that I didn't have to work quite full time. I could work maybe 35 hours a week instead of 40. And that gave me a little bit more time to write. So, yeah, I stayed with them for 3 books. And then with Station 11, I recognized that I had a somewhat more commercial premise than I'd ever had before. And I thought, well, maybe it would be a good moment to change, to change publishers. I really agonized over it because Unbridled was great, but I decided to go for it. They could not have been more gracious. They completely understood. So yeah, then the book sold at auction, which was really amazing. And that's a bidding war. And it's so disorienting and incredible to go from trying desperately to get a publisher to having publishers on the phone to you saying, here's why we're the best publisher in the entire world for your book. It's just like, it's really disorienting and amazing. Yeah, so I sold Station 11. I sold Station 11, and then the success of that book is totally surreal still after all these years. It's really been extraordinary.
Well, and a couple of things I want to highlight about what you said, and then we'll turn into the book a bit, is so many times I think it's surprising how hard it is to get your book published or to become an author like you are. And so I like hearing, I always love these stories of like, I was rejected 97 times or
Right.
whatever, because you just don't know how hard this can be to get your book out there. And there are some kinds of books that go faster,
Yeah.
that are more like sort of more popular for people who want to make books to take on. But so I hope that this is like, for those of you again, or whatever it is you're doing, just understanding that like immediate success isn't really always the thing. Even though YouTubers and or whatever my kids are into, it seems like it. Having lasting success and is something that can take a while, and a lot of like you have to kind of go through a lot of different things to get there. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that story. Um, I wonder if we might turn into the book a bit
Oh,
then.
sure. Yeah.
And because that's, people are really excited to talk about your characters and your bad guys and the setting that you've got going. So we're gonna turn really sharply into the book if that's okay. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading a little bit of the
Yeah.
book to us,
Sure.
because that's always great to hear. So now we're gonna have some reading from the book. If you all may follow along in your copies, I imagine.
Okay, so if anyone's following along, I'm going to read chapter 6. I might jump around a little bit and leave some stuff out. There are a couple of words I don't know how to pronounce in here, so don't tell anybody. Okay, so chapter 6 of Station 11, an incomplete list. No more diving into pools of chlorinated water lit green from below. No more ball games played out under floodlights. No more porch lights with moths fluttering on summer nights. No more trains running under the surface of cities on the dazzling power of the electric third rail. No more cities. No more films, except rarely, except with a generator drowning out half the dialogue, and only then for the first little while until the fuel for the generators ran out, because automobile gas goes stale after 2 or 3 years. No more screens shining in the half light as people raise their phones above the crowd to take photographs of concert stages. No more concert stages lit by candy colored halogens. No more electronica, punk, electric guitars. No more pharmaceuticals. No more certainty of surviving a scratch on one's hand, a cut on a finger while chopping vegetables for dinner, a dog bite. No more flight. No more towns glimpsed from the sky through airplane windows, points of glimmering light. No more looking down from 30,000 feet and imagining the lives lit up by those lights at that moment. No more countries, all borders unmanned. No more fire departments, no more police, no more road maintenance or garbage pickup. No more spacecraft rising up from Cape Canaveral, from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, from Vandenberg, Tanegashima, burning paths through the atmosphere into space. No more internet. No more social media. No more scrolling through litanies of dreams and nervous hopes and photographs of lunches, cries for help and expressions of contentment and relationship status updates with heart icons, whole or broken, plans to meet up later, pleas, complaints, desires, pictures of babies dressed as bears or peppers for Halloween. No more reading and commenting on the lives of others, and in so doing, feeling slightly less alone in the room. No more avatars.
Mm, I'm clapping.
Oh, thank you.
That's that's one of my so I always tell my students this is one of the best passages ever written. And I always say in English as if I read many languages. But I just
Thank you.
love I
That's
love
really nice.
it's really amazing.
You know,
I sometimes make them take the form of it and try to write their own sort of
right.
incantation. Yeah, it's
It
the
was
best.
fun. Yeah, it was fun to write. I want to say that chapter was like 20 pages long, and then I had to pare it down to the things, yeah, the best things in it. But it's funny reading that. This book came out in 2014, and it's funny seeing how quickly social media references get dated. Where back then social media was much more reading, and now it's so visual. It's really, yeah. I was just realizing that as I was reading it this time.
It's gutsy to put something like that into a book because a lot of times in classes you're told don't put anything. You have to be able to endure for 400 years or whatever, like so
Right.
don't put something so specific. So it's still, but I don't know, it's still absolutely. What's
Yeah.
weird is it is so relevant.
And also, like, it is kind of every book is a moment in time. Rereading my first book last night in Montreal, it was like everybody's reading a newspaper, like an actual newspaper, which seems hilarious now. I don't remember the last time I picked up a paper that was made of paper, but yeah, maybe that's okay. It is like a snapshot.
That is, it is, it's funny. That's really interesting. So I have a question about that specific passage. How, you said it was 20 pages originally.
Mhm.
So how did that passage come to you? Like in your writing process for the book, when did you realize you needed to do an incomplete list? And then like, how did some of that stuff just sort of come to you? Do you remember that? This was a while ago.
I do. Yeah, it was a while ago, but it had this really specific impetus, which is that my husband and we have a daughter now. We live about a 40-minute walk from the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is this amazing institution that puts on a lot of theater and live music and movies and things like that. So we went to see a dance performance, and if I try to put a year on this, I want to say about 2011, so I was deep in writing the book. We went to this dance performance. I think it was the William Morris Company, and it was a very experimental work of contemporary dance with a lot of spoken word in it. And there was this really interesting section where two dancers were interacting, and one of them had this litany that had to do with movement. It was like, no more of this and this and this, no more of that with this, with that. And it just stayed with me. And I realized that form, kind of litany that was like a prose poem, that could be a really interesting chapter in this book I was writing. So, when I sat down the next day to try to figure out what that chapter was, there's just so much. Once you start thinking about the modern world and realizing its terrifying fragility and just realizing all the things you lose, no more insulin, no more band-aids, no more antibiotics. Gas goes stale pretty quickly, so no more cars. Like you start to realize how much there is. So yeah, I just went on and on and on of no more of 20 pages worth of things. And my handwriting's pretty big, so maybe it was more like 10 if I'd typed it out. But Yeah, it was a crazily long list. And then I guess I distilled it down to both the things that I hadn't thought of that I found shocking when I considered them, like no more antibiotics, but then also the things that are kind of symbolic. Um, I would not specifically miss space shuttles, in my day to day life. And yet, what a terrible thing, if we can no longer go to space. Just yeah, the momentousness of that loss. So, yeah, it was a matter of distilling it down to 5 pages or so.
It's so great because you can also see not just like the stuff, but like you're saying, the safety that we take advantage
Yeah.
of, and even like electricity. Like this is something that just gets me about our pandemic, which is very weird. I bet you could never have imagined this.
No.
Well, in our pandemic, the real one that you're in right now,
Yeah.
after writing this book, but how important electricity is and how electricity actually has allowed this and all of these other
I
things.
know. I know. Here I am, like railing against the internet. It turns out it's what makes it possible for us to talk to each other in the real pandemic. So,
I know it's really wild, like, and
yeah.
that becomes a thing at the end of the book. It's just amazing to me. So I like the fact that you took another art form. You were like, I'm here, and this is a way of like a package, a way of framing what I wanted to do, and then you just kind of started listing off also those human connections, even through the internet.
Yeah.
Like not that again. We're probably of a generation or more so of like, well, the internet or human connection or whatever, like we have
Right.
some kind of things, but just showing like relationship status and how people reach out through it. I really love that. I have a question for you about the sort of beginning of the book itself.
Mhm.
So I was reading that somewhere that you were like going to do a crime fiction book, and then you did this, and like this is something about you. You were working in a different. You were like, what am I
Right.
doing?
Yeah.
And then you're like, what I'm doing is this. So
Right.
like, it's interesting to me to hear how stories could have been, like the road not taken in a novel or something. And so, what are some of the brief ways you like were thinking about this versus how it turned out?
Yeah, the road not taken was so boring. I'm so glad I didn't take it. So my first three novels were often categorized as crime fiction. And, in fairness, there were like car chases and stabbings and things. But I felt like if I kept going in that vein, I'd be categorized as a crime writer. And this is kind of a delicate point because I have such respect for crime writers and I love crime fiction. But as a writer, once you get put into that kind of marketing box, I feel like
Mhm.
it can be really hard to get out of it and to be able to be taken seriously as like a different kind of writer. So I thought for my fourth book, I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to write about the lives of actors in a traveling Shakespearean theater company. It was going to be set completely in the present day and just be, the trials and tribulations of like performing Shakespeare, in tiny stages and festivals in the rain or whatever it was going to be. And that would have been so boring. What happened was I started writing it and there was something else that had just kind of been, I don't know, bothering me is too strong, but this idea that had been at the back of my mind for a while about the way we take the modern world for granted. And I'm using modern world as shorthand for everything in that chapter: the electricity, the airplanes, the insulin, the band aids, like everything. We don't really notice it because you do have, that's sort of a privilege you have. Like, we don't really have to notice things that we don't need to notice. But it is actually extraordinary that you can take a phone out of your pocket and connect to anybody at the far side of the world. And, we call it a phone, but it's actually a supercomputer. If you read at all about the history of computing, how much power that phone has is kind of astronomical. So I thought, well, maybe it'd be interesting to write about that. And maybe an interesting way to write about it would be to contemplate its absence.
Mm.
So the project of Station 11 was, what does it look like if all of the trappings of civilization were to suddenly fall away? What's left? What would we long for and try to recreate? What would we not miss at all? What would remain? So yeah, that was how it developed. And i- it's um it's kind of strange in retrospect to realize that in the original version there was no apocalypse whatsoever.
I mean, it's kind of like the main thing. Like it's just
Yeah,
so
I
you're
know,
like,
I
I
know.
don't know, maybe something will come of the adventures they have, and then so it's like such an incredible. So I guess this gets to one of the questions that is in the chat, which is, you know, the topic of the post-pandemic world, and how you chose that. It sounds like, you needed something to get to that, what we
Yeah.
take for granted, but also why a pandemic? Like, why not a asteroid or whatever killed off the dinosaurs, or
Right.
why not something else? Like, why a pandemic?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I never considered an asteroid, but that totally would have worked.
Well, there's a sequel right there for
Yeah, exactly. Station 12, ladies and gentlemen. Right. So, as you just alluded to, if you're going to write a post-technological or post-apocalyptic novel, you've got to end the world somehow. So, I wasn't really interested in writing about disaster per se, but I did have to get from point A to point B. So it seemed to me that the two most horribly efficient ways to end civilization would be either a pandemic or a nuclear holocaust. And the thing with writing a novel with a nuclear war in it is that it just becomes really dated really quickly. And, as an example of that, a friend of mine was telling me about this book she read about the aftermath of a nuclear holocaust. Set, I think it had come out in the 70s, and the combatants were Albania and Brazil, which, like, what? That makes absolutely no sense in our current geopolitical framework.
Yeah.
So I thought, a pandemic, maybe that's will become less dated less quickly. So yeah, so I wrote this somewhat scientifically implausible flu pandemic. And yeah, the point was just to cut off civilization so it could be something else 20 years later.
You needed to kill off a lot of people.
I did
You
very
did need
efficiently.
a lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
Um, did you know, I'm sure you know this, but I like the fact that you don't get bogged down in the science as a writer, like, which I love. I love all that stuff, but you're just kind of like, we got other stuff to do in the book, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on that. And so when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, all of the movies of the book, or all of the sort of adaptations, spend all this time on how the creature comes to life, and and all of the science of it. And in the
Right.
book, it's like 3 sentences. It's like
Yeah.
this long. It's like, anyway, something happened and there the creature is. And
Yeah.
it's like, you need to get the plot moving forward in science or whatever,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
can tell the story of the world and the characters and the result of all of that. So I really, really, really love that.
Oh, well, thank you.
I
Yeah.
think it's great that you did that.
It's easy to get bogged down in exposition, but that's not really what interests me as a writer, as a reader, I would say.
Yeah.
That, for me, like the fiction that I can tell required a ton of research. What's most impressive to me as a reader is when I can't see the research, like it just kind of feels real. But yeah, I'm sure there were epidemiologists who were not huge fans of the flu pandemic in Station
I,
11.
you always imagine them in the back of your room, like, well, actually, you're reading, and
Exactly.
like, excuse me,
Yeah, they're like, this is more of a comment than a question.
right, exactly. That's so funny. So back to so what you were able to do by getting rid of, like, or by not having to deal with a lot of the, like, intricacies of how this could
Mhm.
really, really, really happen, is you were able to focus on character, which is
Right.
great because we all love that. So there's a question in the chat about were there any characters in the novel that were based off of people in your real life,
Um,
or even put little bits and pieces in?
yeah. This is going to make me sound really self absorbed, but I actually put pieces of my own life in two characters, Miranda and Arthur. And neither of them are avatars, but I was interested in writing about what we talked about back at the beginning, your relationship to home,
Yeah.
where home is a place that you loved and also found totally claustrophobic, when you were a teenager. And the feeling of freedom that can come for some people from moving from that to a huge anonymous city. So, yeah, I definitely use that experience for both Arthur and Miranda. And then I would also say with Miranda, um, that experience of practicing your art around the margins of your day job, that I'm just so familiar with. I didn't quit my day job until a year after Station 11 came out. And I was just so used to writing in the margins of everything I had to do to pay the rent. So, yeah, I guess I wanted to write about that too.
Well, and that's interesting because so my own students, so in my college class of novelists, so they've all written novels and they're revising them. We're reading this as well. So you're talking about how you're doing, really nuts and bolts characterization
Mhm.
technique stuff, which is so fun to talk about. But we realized, like, even though you've got, is it Kirsten or Kirsten? How do you hear?
I hear it as Kirsten.
Okay, so even though you have Kirsten is kind of like this important, I mean, arguably the most important character in the present, right? Because but she's so unknowable. She's just like this. There's just she's you don't get to know her the way you get to know Miranda, the way you get to know Arthur or Clark, and so it made me kind of wonder, like, was it because Kirsten is like, traumatized and won't let you in or won't let us in? Like, why is she such a different type of character in your book
Right.
than these other ones who are so like rich and I know they get the past world, like you can do a lot because
Yeah.
there's like relationships and paparazzi and stuff. But it's interesting. Kirsten just really feels like she's at arm's length. Like
Hmm.
you are not to know her, even you, the writer, are supposed
Yeah.
to know her. So what was it like
Right.
to write her?
Um, it was interesting. I have to say, it was much easier to write the post-apocalyptic sections of the book
Really?
than the pre-apocalyptic sections. And maybe it had something to do with that. That, I do see her as being very much a product of her world. She would have been a completely different person if that pandemic hadn't happened and if she'd had what we would think of as a more normal life.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's been out on the road since she was like 9 or something, and that's absolutely shaped her. So, yeah, I think you alluded to something at the core of her character, which is that, yeah, she's very guarded, I would say.
She won't let you in. And in like we get into the brains of all these other characters, but it's just interesting. Like I love reading about how authors and however you buy into this, but like Alice Walker talking to her characters as she's writing them from the color purple, if they're
Hmm.
having conversations, I'm imagining you trying to write somebody like Kirsten, and she's like, nope, I'm not telling you. You don't
Right.
get it. You don't get this part of me, right? I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
make myself vulnerable to you. You don't get inside my head. Like I see
Yeah.
her so tough.
Although
Oh,
she is literally interviewed in the book. So you do get a little bit of her.
but she's like not and that's just interesting. She's just so guarded. I
Mhm.
just would think it'd be interesting if you had such a character and she's so fierce. Like in every,
Yeah.
is it easy to get to even know them behind the scenes, as weird as that sounds?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
I will say that our favorite character, my favorite character, and my student's favorite character, well, we had a bunch, but we really love Miranda. So, and you had just said you were really interested in her because you had to think about what's it like to be an artist on the side.
Mhm.
Um, I'm interested in, did you have to, do you draw? Like, did you have to research drawing and art and stuff? Like, how did you make
Right.
those things make sense?
I appreciate you saying they made sense because yeah, I have no background as a visual artist. I'm just a fan of the form.
Yeah.
So when I was thinking of that character, I liked the idea of her having some kind of art form that she could practice at her desk.
Mhm.
So it's not painting. It's got to be something that she can like discreetly put under a file folder when her boss walks by. Um, and a few years before I started writing the novel, a friend of mine had given me a graphic novel. It was one of Neil Gaiman's books. I really respect his work. It was called Brief Lives, one of the Sandman series. It was my introduction to the form, and I just found it so beautiful. I loved it as just as like a work of art. So, yeah, I was thinking of that book when I was thinking about Miranda's art. I never It didn't feel necessary to get into technical details. If it had been a character or a plot where I felt like that was indispensable, then I would have done a ton of research and figured out how to actually draw. But mhm.
Have have people made that comic? Like, have people done what it is that have people done like the fan fiction? Have you seen anybody that's like kind of created in the world what it is that she was working on in the book at all? Do you know?
Not a full comic book,
Okay.
but so this was a really cool publication thing. I have a genius editor in the UK, Sophie Jonathan. She's just amazing. She had this incredible marketing idea for the first edition hardcover when it came out. So there's a moment in Station 11. This is a huge spoiler, but you were probably supposed to read the book anyway, so I'm just going to put it out there. Where when the prophet dies, Kirsten picks up his copy of something, and a page from the Station 11 comic book falls out.
Mhm.
Um, at that page where that happens in the first edition in the UK, there was a folded up comic book page, like showing, from the Station 11 comic books. It's so beautiful. It's really, it's the opposite of what I thought it would be. Like it wasn't at all how I envisioned it, but it's just so good. So yeah, there's at least 2 pages out there. I don't think anybody's done the whole book though. That would require like a ton of work to figure out what that plot is.
Yeah, but that would be so
It would
interesting.
be really cool. I'd love to see it.
You could have like people's thoughts in like those boxes,
Yeah.
and like you could just close in on the tattoos of the knife and the
Yeah.
tattoos of the knives and stuff. That would be really
Yeah,
great.
definitely.
Do you think I'm going to come back to some of the questions in the chat, but this makes me wonder. You said you were before we all were live here. You were saying how interesting it is to work on a screenplay because it's totally different than a novel. Does it make you think you'd want to actually write a graphic novel or try to work with someone on
Right.
that?
Maybe. I'm not sure is the honest answer.
Hmm.
There was a period of time a few years ago when I actually started writing the script for a graphic novel. So it's kind of interesting. I hadn't realized this, but in their initial form, they're written as scripts by a writer. It's very much like a movie script with like angles specified.
Mm,
So that was really interesting, kind of dabbling in that.
yeah.
But by the time I was working on that, I was halfway through this epic tour for Station 11, and I was really deep in my next book, The Glass Hotel. So it just kind of felt like the wrong project. I really wanted to focus on this exciting new novel, and I felt like I'd already written Station 11, and it was hard to spend more time there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I put it to the side, and that was years ago, and I've been totally distracted ever since. But
Easily. Like you've got stuff going on.
I got stuff going on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a 5-year-old. He's
Yeah,
busy.
I mean, at the
Yeah,
very least, right? That's really that's. I was just curious because it's like if you kind of imagined it, like, would you want to go farther?
right.
Um, I see that someone has said that their favorite is it Jivan or Jeevan? How you
Jeevan.
imagine Jeevan? Okay, so
Yeah.
Jeevan was the favorite character of I think a classroom. So who was your favorite character to write out of everybody?
I really loved Clark. He was fun to write, and also Miranda. I have to say,
Yeah.
yeah, I liked her a lot too.
Why did you why did you like writing Clark? I'm just curious. Like what? Because he seems
But
really he's an interesting angle on everything.
yeah. I guess I was thinking about older gay men who I've known over the years, and uh, yeah, I just feel like I've known a lot of older men who've just been absolutely lovely and loved a particular kind of music that Clark loves. He's into punk, he's into electronica. So I guess he reminded me of people who've been important in my life over the years.
Ah,
And then I also just kind of like his perspective of having spent, I want to say he's 51 when the pandemic comes. So he just has this deep gratitude that he had the incredible fortune of living for half a century in a spectacular world.
right.
And that he's able to see this world that we live in now as spectacular and not be absolutely destroyed by wishing it would come back. That there's something about that I liked about him.
Yeah. That he's able to curate and like sort of choose the best parts of it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, as a side note, I will just say one of my this nobody on the screen probably at all cares about this, but this was so funny to me. He always had to write those really empty reports of
Mhm.
like in with all the business speak terms or his metaphors. And then in the towards the very end of the novel, like he and some other people are kind of it's almost like theater. Like they're like reading this like
I know. Yeah.
it's even more empty now because what is anyone talking about? Is this cracking me
Yeah.
up? It's
Yeah.
like the ways that we speak. Okay, so I have some really good questions from the chat that are sort of related to this. Back to Kirsten.
Mhm.
Um, Savannah's asking, did you have an idea about what might have happened to Kirsten in year one, or can we know, or is it something that again, like it's you're not going to imagine it for her. You just know it was traumatic and terrible. So
Yeah. I didn't even really lay that out like in my outline for myself.
mhm,
So I guess the real answer is I don't really know what happened to her on the road. But I liked the idea. I should say I like the idea in general, just as an approach to horror
mhm,
of suggesting a thing instead of spelling it out. So her lost year on the road, it's really the same principle as the Air Gradia jet in the airport, where, it lands, it turns away from the terminal, it goes to the furthest possible point on the tarmac, and nobody ever comes out. Like, I could describe what those last hours on board are like, but I kind of feel like I don't need to. I think that sometimes as a writer, you can just sort of suggest the horror, and anything your readers imagine will be at least as effective, as anything I could come up with. So that kind of fell into that category for me. I felt like even I didn't really need to know that it was just really, really bad.
It's interesting. I think I had read something where Stephen King was talking about, and I'm probably mangling this completely, but horror is there's like a body under the sheet, and that you can recognize that could be you,
Hmm.
right? And so you don't need to you can get really graphic, and you can do all kinds of stuff that people do with depicting horror, but the real sort of tension is the fact that it could be you, and you don't know what's under that sheet completely. Like,
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
entirely sure. So that the fact that, and I love the fact that you just said that there's the plane, and you don't know
Hmm.
what's going on in there, and there's Kirsten's backstory, and you're not going to get that, and you can
Right.
just fill in what you think that would be. What's your worst fear? What's your worst anxiety? And that's hers, right?
Yeah.
So it's very effective.
Oh, good.
Um,
Good.
which makes me wonder how they're going to do how they're going to do that with the series. Anyway,
That's a great
we'll find out
question.
later.
I have no idea.
I know. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to write it? Like, what are they going to do with it?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so I had another. So I want to move us to the bad guy. So not only did you not have a pandemic, you probably when you were first starting, you probably didn't have like a threat. Like,
No, no, there was no profit in the
yeah,
original idea.
I can imagine. And so um, how did he come into the book? And then some other questions we've gotten like from the students here, and we're going to talk a little bit more.
Mhm.
How do you imagine he got so much control? Like, that's of course another airplane on the tarmac version of we don't know.
Right, right.
But so when did he come into the story for you? And then what do you think made him, such a powerful guy? Two separate
Um,
questions.
yeah, yeah. I would assume that he probably killed whoever was in charge of, that group of people beforehand. The thing, yeah, the character of the prophet. A criticism I've gotten over the years is that there's something a little bit rote about the prophet because most post-apocalyptic novels have a prophet. And the criticism is, well, that's kind of it's kind of a cliche at this point. And the way I was thinking about it, though, is it's a cliche for a reason. What we see, not just in creepy post-apocalyptic fiction, but here on Earth, and think of the most lawless places in the world where government is absolutely the weakest. That's a power vacuum. And somebody is going to step up and fill that, whether it's a warlord or an armed militia, whatever it is. So there's that. And then at the same time, I was thinking about the way that people get pulled into cults.
Mhm.
And not everybody who gets pulled into a cult necessarily has a troubled history. But I think people with troubled histories are uniquely susceptible because they're grappling with these terrible questions like, how did this happen to me? And here's somebody with easy answers. Well, it happened for a reason. We don't live alone in an indifferent and chaotic universe. There's a plan. I can show you the plan. Let me show you how the world works.
Mhm.
And it seemed to me that in a situation where there's a complete power vacuum and everybody's traumatized, everybody's lost everyone they loved in this horrific pandemic, that people would be uniquely susceptible to a character like the prophet. Somebody shows up who has answers, extremely charismatic, has a plan. I modeled him off of David Koresh of the Branch Davidians in Texas, which, for anybody who's unfamiliar, this is worth Googling. It's a crazy story from the 90s. And yeah, I based the prophet on what I read Koresh was like, which was highly intelligent, very charismatic, with this almost supernatural ability to flip through the book of Revelations and pick out whatever verse seemingly justified whatever crazy thing he was planning on doing that week, 11-year-old brides or whatever it was. Yeah, so I was thinking of him in those terms. I did recognize that in the character of the prophet, I'm presenting a pretty negative vision of religion, which was not actually my intent. It was just kind of a side effect. So I tried to balance that negativity a little bit. with the character of August, who I kind of see as the anti-prophet, whereas the prophet is dangerous, violent, and coercive. August's spirituality just involves talking to and saying prayers over the bodies of the dead. There's something very kind of private and low key and gentle about it, which was something I liked. So yeah, I tried to balance that in some way.
That just threw me for a complete loop, and that makes thank you. Like I never would have put that together, but you're like that's a really your awareness of how that might hit, right?
Right.
You might be thought of as saying, and then to give some spirituality to a mild, peaceful, and really respectful character.
Yeah, he's a
August,
really good guy.
yeah, he is, and that, and even like in the the way that you think should he and Kirsten be together, or like even that, like they're very respectful of their boundaries, which is just he's just an all around like lovely character. So that's really interesting. I think what I love too about what you're doing in the novel is you're showing two characters who are kind of like a separated at birth story, which is Kirsten and Tyler.
Mhm.
And they both are connected to Arthur. They both get the comic book, right? You could, it's not really separate, you know what I mean? But they're like
Yeah.
they have the similarities. And Kirsten goes to the world of art and ambivalence and ambiguity and processing and interpreting
Mhm.
and connecting with the crowd. But the point of the connection is, what do you think about that? Or wasn't that a different way to do it? Or what do they mean when they say, like, not, it's not answers, it's the
Yeah.
opposite, it's the
Right.
questions. Whereas Tyler gravitates towards dogma and let's
Yeah.
supply the answer. And I love the fact that they both are the kids of the pandemic, but they take these completely different angles with absolutely nothing. They have the same sorts of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, you're right about that. There is kind of an interesting mirror there.
Yeah,
I have so much sympathy for Tyler, who becomes the prophet.
yeah.
He never stood a chance.
No.
Whereas Kirsten had a bad year on the road and then got picked up by a traveling Shakespearean theater company. Tyler's mother took him away from the airport to join a cult. And was that ever going to go well? So yeah, I feel like there was a sort of like horrible inevitability about his fate.
But I love the way too, though. Then you like because he's this bad guy, and then he gets a little bit more known, and then you like, oh my gosh, that's who this is. And then when we get to the end of the novel, he's humanized in this beautiful way. As like as you're doing in that last section, where it's kind of like the death of Arthur, the death.
Mhm.
Of, we're wrapping all these great things up, and we see that conversation that he has with his dad, and he's just this little kid, and life is
Yeah.
going to change, and that we get that scene, we get to see him at that needy, young, sweet, inquisitive point. Like it gives you sympathy after the fact. Um,
Right. Right.
and it's really useful. Like it's really like it's like, oh, okay, that's how I should feel about it.
Right. No, I appreciate you saying that. That was a really late edit in the book. So originally, Tyler and the prophet were two different people. And
Wow.
yeah, and the challenge there is like how to make the prophet not completely two dimensional. Is like if he's not Tyler, he's like a Disney villain, like twirling his mustache. It's like a cartoon character.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an idea I had pretty late in the revision process that, you know what, we've gotta see him before he's the prophet. Because otherwise his death is meaningless. You're like, great, the two-dimensional bad guy died, like whatever.
Also like just what a revelation for your brain to come up with late in the process, like, oh my God, Tyler is the prophet. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like it's perfect. Like it solves so many things. It makes everything align. It just sort of all the dominoes fall the right way. It would seem like that would be such a gift to
Well,
come
thank you.
with.
It's a lot of just like brute force revisions. It took me about a year to write the first draft of Station 11.
Okay.
But I wasn't even halfway done at that point. After that, it was a year and a half of just going over the book over and over and over and over again. And yeah, the more I go through, the more I go over a manuscript, the more connections I see that I can make to try to pull it all together and make it feel more cohesive.
So it doesn't turn out perfect the first time. This is
Believe
something
it or not, no, it's great.
I always hated revision. I always thought it was a punishment. And then I was like, oh, no,
Right.
you actually need to do this. This brings up some questions about your writing process. So we have
Sure.
a couple of these. Do you have a regular writing space or time? So where do you physically create this? And this is also both Ms. Teska and Ellie have these questions. Like, so where do you like
Okay.
to write? What's it like to write?
You're looking at it, and I'm not going to change the angle because my office is a mess. I don't want you to see it, but this is the sort of nice view of it. I've got this crazy tapestry thing on the wall that I bought in my neighborhood a few years ago. I just kind of like fell in love with it. There's a view of like dirty snow outside my window. Yeah, so I work at a standing desk in my home office. This is my absolute favorite place to write. Before the pandemic, I was traveling a lot. I would have done an event like this in person. I did a lot of events like this, which was just, it's such an honor and such a privilege. So yeah, I was on the road all the time. So I learned to be really flexible, writing in airports and Starbucks and hotel rooms, which by the way, for anybody listening who's a writer, that's a real skill you can develop that will allow you to get more done. If you can just write whenever you have a moment, that really helps. Yeah. So I've kind of been stuck at home for a year with the pandemic, and this is about the only place I write. Sometimes at night, I'll write a little bit in the kitchen after my daughter goes to bed.
See, it's the time thing. And when you and
Yeah.
I love the fact that I had read about your tour, like your
Mhm.
never-ending tour of your year on the road for
Yeah.
station or even more, and you were everywhere. And if you do lock yourself into, I can only have this mug and this light and this candle as
Yeah.
my process, it makes it so much harder to do the work, right?
Yeah, it does. And I also just feel like it's the wrong mindset. Like you don't want to be precious about writing. It's meaningful to me in a deep level. It's also my job. Like this is how I'm paying for the childcare that's happening upstairs right now. So yeah, if you can treat it as a job, like go to your desk, sit down, do the work whenever you can, I think you'll get a lot more done. Oh, and the other part of the question was when do I write?
Yeah.
Um, it's totally childcare dependent. This week I have about 3.5 days of childcare. And then on the weekends, my husband takes my daughter for a couple of hours and I'll write then. Yeah, so just kind of whenever I can is the real answer.
When it's possible to have school, this will be so exciting for you. Like,
Yeah, yeah, God, I used to think childcare was somehow complicated before the pandemic. It totally wasn't. I just dropped her off at preschool and then came back and worked. But yeah, I'm looking forward to those days returning.
yeah, I understand. I want to just give a quick anecdote about the writing when you can, just because I tell my students this and I find
Mhm.
it so wild. There's a writer out there who was also trying to write a novel, had a full-time job, sort of the conditions you're talking about. How do I make my writing small and portable and I can do it anytime? And he would pull into his driveway and he realized he had like 17 minutes before anyone in his house was like, "What's going on with that in the driveway?" Or the neighbors started to worry. So he trained himself to write in those 17 minutes
Wow.
between pulling in, I know, and then going into the house. Like, I always
That's
love,
I
yeah,
love that. That's fantastic.
yeah. So you're like, well, I should at least be able to do. So I always have my writers, okay, 17 minutes a day. That's all I'm asking for you. Figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And this is one of
Yeah.
those things where if that guy, it took him forever, but he did it.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So I imagine those airports with you and the planes and so forth would have been just like that same, okay, I got the
Yeah.
time. I can
Yeah.
do it.
Noise blocking headphones, laptop, like just do it. Yeah.
Catch it in. All right. So let me, is it okay if I continue the
Oh,
event?
yeah, definitely. Let's keep going.
All right. Because I know there's a transition that Beth was going to make. I want to make sure. We
It's
good?
fine. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So a couple more questions here. So people kind of want to know beyond the book and like what happened, sort of the stories, like where you end the book, but like what do you think is going on after this point? So let me ask you a couple of these questions
Okay.
because
Sure.
they're fun. So do you think that the characters will find manuals and books and start to create society and technology? Do you think they're going to rebuild the world? Do you?
Yeah, I do. But I'm also not convinced that like other people haven't already figured that out. It's a conversation I've had a lot at events where people are like, how after 20 years do they not have an electrical grid? And it's like, well, you hope that if there was some kind of catastrophic event, that the 1 in 10 person who survives would be, the doctor slash physicist slash inventor slash power technician who can build solar panels.
Right.
But what if it's the novelist? Like, I have no idea how to make like electricity happen. So,
Yeah.
the loss of human knowledge. You could go to the library. If the books weren't mostly burned for fuel in the first couple of years. So, I just felt like there'd be this crazy knowledge deficit. Uh, but that's just in the world of the book,
Yeah,
which, those post-apocalyptic sections, it's mostly a pretty narrow territory, this strip of northern Michigan lakeshore.
yeah.
So yeah, that's not to say that in Texas they haven't gotten it together and yeah, figured out large scale electricity. So what I kind of imagined was just that the world would keep changing.
Okay.
That probably the symphony would begin to move through a world which had more in the way of amenities.
Mm,
Uh, the question of whether the old world will ever come back feels kind of terribly relevant at the moment, I have to say. That, there's really some question in my mind, like how soon the lost paradise of 2019 will return. And even though obviously the changes we're facing are a fraction of what the people in the book are, there's not going to be a children's vaccine for another year. So do I really send my kid to school? I don't know. That's something to figure out in September. But yeah, little things like that, or when will it be reasonably safe to fly again, or gather in rooms, or I haven't seen my family in 14 months. Like that's yeah. So these are things that I find myself thinking about now more than I did then. I suppose what I would predict is that in the post Station 11 world, that probably the world would never go back to exactly what it was at whatever unspecified year that pandemic hit. But it would keep changing. It would be something else 20 years after the action of the book.
yeah, I mean, I think of the low flu rates now because everyone's masked. Like everyone's like, I think we
Yeah,
wiped out the flu. Like it's mumps or some I don't know some other
yeah, yeah.
smallpox or something. And just like there are you see people saying on social media, well, I will never not wear a mask again because this is the healthiest I've been in for a long
Hmm.
time. And so you're wondering like, do we have a masked future?
We
Um,
do. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, like, just anecdotally, I keep bringing this back to my kid. I'm sorry. When she was in preschool for 2 years, I would just be sick from November to May, like, just, matter of course. That's been one nice thing about the pandemic. So, yeah, you're right. Maybe it will be more of a masked world. I definitely like the idea of wearing masks on planes. That just seems sensible at this point.
I miss lipstick a little because I had just
Yeah.
hit a lipstick phase and I was like, all right, now I really figured out who I am. And then
Right.
and then
Right.
the mask thing came and my teen daughter is like, man, but then it's also kind of I don't know, it's like you get to only have to pay
I
attention.
know. The makeup is super easy now.
I know. It's like
Yeah.
no one can see me anyway. Do I even
Yeah.
brush my teeth? So absolutely. Okay, so a couple more questions around what we've got from the chat here. So there's a really good question from Jacob that was it's a two-parter. Is there any correlation between Station 11 and your next book, The Glass Hotel? And then bracketing that off,
Mhm.
but related, do you think you'll add some characters from Station 11 into any other books that you write in the future?
Yes to both. Okay, so the first question, the Glass Hotel takes place in a different universe than Station 11. So in the Glass Hotel, the flu is not coming. But I did really want to reuse a couple of those characters. So even though it's a different universe, Miranda from Station 11 is a very small character in the Glass Hotel. And Leon, her boss, he's basically a cameo in Station 11. It's a very small character. He's one of the major characters in the Glass Hotel.
Huh.
I really liked him, even though he didn't really get much airtime in Station 11. So yeah, there is some crossover there. Um, I really liked Clark, and I could really imagine using him again in some other like parallel universe way.
Is it hard though? Wouldn't it be? I think a challenge might be is they feel like they're so sort of knitted into a really specific way of thinking about them.
Right.
Um, I mean, maybe, and I don't know. I've not written a complete novel yet. I'm still trying.
Not
So
easy.
I know, yeah. I just such praise for you doing 5 of these and working on
Yeah.
a 6. And they're so great. But like like being able to spatula them out of this
Mhm.
very specific thing and then making them like letting them be free.
Right.
It seems like that would be maybe difficult to do. Is it? Do you see it the opposite way? Do you think it'd be like, oh no,
Yeah.
that can really be full Clark now because he doesn't have a pandemic?
Right. Yeah, I do kind of see it in the opposite way. I guess I look at it in terms of character development, where
Yeah.
it's like I don't have to build a new character from scratch. I'm just bringing in Miranda. I know who she is. So, yeah, it almost feels like a shortcut in that way. It probably helps that I kept Miranda in the same world in a way. where, you know, her appearance in the Glass Hotel is all about her life as a shipping executive,
Okay.
which is a pretty small part of Station 11, but it was a part that really interested me.
My students were so bummed. They're like, I can't believe she died. And I was like,
I know,
"Yeah,
sorry.
there's a
Yeah,
pandemic.
somebody had to go.
You need somebody." And it should be somebody you care about. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what's it all for?
Yeah, I mean, originally it was Jeevan, if that makes anybody feel better or worse. In the
Not that
original,
one class. They loved
yeah, sorry,
it.
that Jeevan class. Yeah, in the original draft, Jeevan died of exposure on the walk out of Toronto, and Miranda lived. And I don't remember why I flipped that, but at some point I did.
I think, but it makes sense. Like I was surprised that Jeevan made it, right? But I liked being surprised by that. I thought he was
Right.
a goner in any number of ways, and so I really did. I personally love that, and he was. It was nice to see him. It was almost like, you know, um, him coming back. Like when this is a terrible analogy, but a long time ago when there was television that you had to watch on schedule,
Hmm.
and there'd be like someone from like a character from remember ER would be
Yeah,
on Friends, right? And you're like, that's George Clooney. It's kind
right.
of like he came back in the same thing, but he was in it 20 years later. He was okay. It
Yeah,
came through. It was like a nice thing. But Miranda, I mean, absolutely. Like, what were her options, right? Like, really.
yeah. And you know, there's this weird tension that you run into if you write a novel with an it's really hard to say, an apocalyptic event. That, you know, you can't kill off everybody. Like, you've got to have people left to tell the story. Um, but if all of your major characters survive, then like how deadly could that flu actually have been? You know, it's like in bad movies where like all the extras die on the spaceship, but like the
Yeah.
the principals are fine.
But all the best looking people make it. You're like,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
great,
If you've
but
got a chiseled jaw, you're fine.
that's right. You have a little bit of stubble.
Yeah, yeah.
This is interesting because I'm my novel I'm working on is there's this big fire in Wisconsin, the Peshtigo
Mhm.
fire that happened the
Okay.
same night as the Chicago fire, but no one knew about it. 1871 wiped out 2,000 people around, even in
Wow.
Door County, like all kinds of stuff. So of course I'm like, well, that sounds like a really interesting. Finally, I have a plot. Like, been a short
Right.
story writer, now I have something to do. But it's when you're right, and this is the thing I wanted. This is what I'm getting to is when you're writing characters that have to die. I mean, if I've got something like there's a big fire. I have to create characters that are specifically alive that
Yeah.
have to die because that's like the thing that makes the rest of the book. So I guess what I'm curious about is how do you feel as a writer when you have to do that to a character that you really
Yeah, pretty bad.
love?
I felt really bad about what I did to Miranda. It,
Really?
it it felt, yeah, it felt necessary from a narrative standpoint, you know, as you're just alluding to, but you don't feel great about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gave her like a nice death though. You let her be in the sunset. You
Yeah,
made
you know,
her
if you've got to go, a beach
right.
chair,
Yeah.
you know, gazing out at a sunset, like you could do worse. But
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, it was, yeah.
tropical. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe a cabana boy baby. Right. So that's really, I mean, that was, you gave her a nice death, which was really great, but that guilt that you have to feel like, sorry, it has
Yeah.
to happen. We can't have the novel if you're
Yeah,
here. What are we gonna
exactly.
do?
But then I
Yeah.
did resuscitate her for the next book. So it's,
So
it's
good.
fine.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Parallel
That's great.
universes.
You totally did.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to do a few more questions,
Yeah,
Beth?
sure. Oh,
Beth,
sorry.
is that I mean you, but also Beth, is that all right? Should we do, what's our timing?
Yeah. Well, we've got about 15 minutes
Okay.
before classes start to end and things start to
We have,
go. So yeah, there were just a few more questions that happened in the chat. Most of them were about writing process. Actually, you picked up most of the questions that were about the book specifically and about characters in the book. But yeah, there were just a couple more about writing process. If you guys want to keep going, absolutely. Yeah, keep
Sure,
going,
Let's do
keep
it.
going.
all right, good. We'll keep going. All right, just want to make sure. And again, if there's anyone out there who has a question, please post it because we'd love to talk about what you're really really interested in. Ooh, you already see a new one. Oh, do you have any pets?
I do. Yeah. I have two very old cats. Yeah. Ralph and Louie.
Really? How
Yeah.
old?
I'm 16. Really old. Yeah.
Wow. Someone had said of old cats, they're kind of like sticks and feathers at that.
They kind of are. They get all kind of like kind of raggedy looking.
Yeah,
They're really sweet.
little guys.
Yeah.
That's great. So, and are they allowed in your writing chambers? Are they allowed to be?
No, no, they're not.
How do you deal with the like? Well, they're older, so they're not
They're
charming.
older. Yeah. Yeah.
They're just in a
They're,
little
they mostly nap at this point, so it's not an issue.
Well, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so question about if you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
But I might do more than one. I guess the main piece of advice would be just something about not being afraid to change your plan. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was never more certain of the way the world worked than when I was 17. Like I had it figured out. And you figure out that you don't actually know how anything works, as you get older. Yeah, when I was 18, I might have already had the first intimations that I might not actually want to be a dancer, but that was really scary. I was in this like fancy conservatory program. Yeah, not being too set on the plan that you had, if you have a plan. I guess just being open to that changing.
Okay, excellent. Um, Another question. Um, this is from Mindy Vanderhoof. Shout out. Hello, Mindy. Kelly Gallagher always says you have to do a lot of bad writing to get to the good writing. I tell my students the same thing. Can you speak to that and the revision process?
Oh, absolutely. My first drafts are terrible. And you'll never see them because they're so bad. But yeah, so this is how I think about bad writing, which is completely, inevitable as part of the process of getting to a good book. I remember when I was a teenager seeing some interview on CBC television where the interviewer was talking to this guy who carved these really realistic ducks out of blocks of wood. And the interviewer said, well, how do you make them so realistic? Like, how do you do it? The carver was like, well, I just take the block of wood and I carve away everything that isn't the duck. And, I loved that because that's kind of how I write novels. My first drafts are kind of raw material. They are all over the place. I don't write from an outline. So, a character, like the decade will change from one page to the other. There are huge problems. The plot will make no sense. The characters are like placeholders, basically. And but that's not the novel. That's like the block of wood in which I'm going to find the novel. And finding the novel is what the revisions are for me. So my revision process, once I have my incredibly like messy first draft, I usually revise it about 3 times, like just in the regular way, like reading through it, fixing problems. And at first, the problems are enormous. And then the more you revise, the smaller the problems get. Um, the rhythm of language is really important to me. So I read the entire book aloud. And that's not actually just for rhythm. It's also because you catch awkward sentences that you don't really notice if it's there on the page. So reading the book aloud really helps. I also have this trick that I learned by accident because I had this really bad printer a few years ago and it could only handle about 20 pages at a time or it would just like freak out. What I noticed is that when I pulled these random pages off the printer, page 21, 41, whatever, I would see all of these errors that I hadn't spotted before. So, what I started doing is revising my books in random page order. And it is the single most useful trick I have. So, my theory is that if you've been looking at this manuscript for a long time, you almost literally can't see it anymore. There could be a typo in the first sentence, and you will just glide right over that and not see it. Um, and then I think, when you come up against problems in the prose, your brain kind of knows what's next or knows what it's supposed to be and sort of skips over it. But if you revise page 250 and then page 4 and then page 37 and then page 1 and just jump wildly all over the place, you will spot huge problems that you completely missed. And my theory is that it's like it forces your brain, almost like a reset button, forces your brain to just process it differently. So yeah, I read it aloud. I do the random page order edit. I retyped the entire manuscript of Station 11, kind of for the same reason. That was, I don't know, I know that works for some authors. I haven't done it with subsequent books. A really important thing for me after I've been revising, for a while is to give it to early readers. And that can be a little hard, but what you're looking for is maybe 3 people, if you can find them, who won't just say, this is great, because it can always be improved. You need somebody who, is not horrible about it, but will tell you what's wrong with the work. So yeah, I give it to 3 readers. They always have notes I hadn't thought of. I revise based on that. Then at that point, I've been revising for like a year and a half, and I'll send it to my agent. Agents also give really great editorial notes. So she always has great notes for me, and then I revise again based on that, and then it goes to my editors. So yeah, it's a long process. I really kind of enjoy the revisions. There's just this feeling like my bad first draft is getting better and better.
It's the way that you're describing it as the block of wood. It also shows that there are these phases of revision. So often we think of revision, or maybe newer writers think of revision as that part where you're reading the words out loud, like, because the words are already
Right.
set. You're like, oh, I'm done. And
Yeah.
so what you're doing is you're like, there's wood, and then there's like
Mhm.
the big construction of the revision to get to the novel, and then there's that refinement where you're looking at the language and you're like, let's make the feathers a little more particular. Like, it's already
Exactly.
set.
Yeah.
And you're like that defamiliarization. Like, I've seen this thing a billion times now. I can't see it anymore. The fact that you're such a I don't know how the categories work, but I feel like you're a language driven writer. I'm very attracted to that. I think
Mhm.
about language before I hear something, before I actually like think of characters, right? Like, that's the thing that leads me in. I'm interested in the fact that you read it out loud. And that, so I wonder sometimes as you're reading it out loud, does that also give you more ideas? I mean, it's not just necessarily kicking the tires of, no, this sounds good.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's generative too, like it helps you see something else in there, or like gives you, I don't know. I wonder does that also
I-
help?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think all those things help you see other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will often find myself, adding a paragraph or something.
Because there's a word and you're like, ooh, what is that symbol?
Yeah, exactly. Or sometimes it's just completely technical. Like, is this clear enough? No, let me put something else in there. So,
Let me address
yeah.
the ambiguity. Well, we can probably maybe end on this really great question that I kind of like love, if that's all right with
Okay,
you,
sure.
which is, if you could live in one of the books that you wrote, which one would it be?
Um,
Or
the
would you
glass.
want to live in any of them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, I don't think I'd want to hang out with any of the people I wrote, but the Glass Hotel. But so the Glass Hotel, a large part of it is set in New York City around like 2008, 2009. And so I actually did live in that world. And it was great in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think that's the one I'd choose. I was attracted to the beauty of the post-apocalyptic world in Station 11.
Hmm.
But I mean, if you start thinking at all about the technical aspects of actually living in that, without modern dentistry, I would have no teeth. Is kind of my feeling. So, yeah, I very much enjoy the amenities of the modern world.
I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Because we're all here in the modern world,
Here we are.
virtually.
Yeah, on Zoom.
I've got a backdrop. So excellent. Well, Beth, do you want to? Can I switch it to you?
Sure. Thank you very much, both of you, for all of this talk. Thank you for all of the students and teachers who came into this. We really appreciate you being here. We would like to encourage you to do a couple of things. First, there are still more programs to come. Tonight, these 2 ladies who you just have listened to will be back again to talk to the general public. So you are welcome to come to that. That is this evening at 7 o'clock, did we say? 7 p.m. You can come in with a Zoom call just like you're doing right now. That will also be recorded. This is going to be recorded for the teachers to use in classrooms, should they choose to do so. So that will be made available to all of you. If you would like to send me an email to tell me what you thought of all of this, this would be absolutely fine. I think all the teachers have my email address. There is not only tonight, but we have things going on tomorrow and Saturday. If you did not hear earlier, I mean, you may not have caught it, Ms. Mandel is going to be having a conversation about turning things into like movies. television shows. It's going to be a visual art form as well as a written art form. So these are all going to be fantastic things that you can still attend virtually, just exactly as we're doing right now. The other thing is all of the stuff that we have been doing since the 28th of January has all been recorded. All of the stuff. The only things that didn't make it into the recordings are all of the theater pieces. So all of the theater things, those were one-offs. We can't have those, but everything else is available and recorded, and you can watch it till the end of February. If you missed anything, if it happened and you went, oh my gosh, I forgot about that, you can still see it all. It is all recorded for you. So enjoy this as you can. I really had a wonderful time listening to you guys talk, and thank you so much for all of the students and teachers who wrote in, had questions. Everything was fantastic. I'm so pleased. All right. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you once again to the teachers. This has been the NEA Big Reed Door County Station 11 with Emily St. John Mandel and Rebecca Meacham. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Bye, everyone.